smoked a lot of grass. Oh Lord, I popped a lot of pills. In 1972, I was living in Cockrell Hill on the western edge of Oak Cliff, where I grew up. Long-haired and dirt poor, I was a student at the University of Dallas and had a part-time job as a surgical orderly. Cockrell Hill was a moldering blue-collar town of cheap rentals and package stores. It was also a favorite of hippies looking for low rent, as was I. Instead of me leaving home, home left me. My mother and father divorced when I was 12. My father was an ex-boxer and a scofflaw of the highest order. He did collections and enforcement for the mob in Kansas City, Miami, Chicago, Denver, Dallas. He also ran cons, including arson, and I suspect he did hits. Between prison terms and his rambling life, he wasn't home much. He was cunning, charming, dishonest to the bone. I loved him. In 1972, he was on the lam for a crime he never disclosed, but whatever it was, the FBI was after him. My mom was a hard-working nurse anesthetist. In 1971, she left Dallas to take a lucrative position in a mining company hospital in Morenci, Arizona, taking my brother and sister with her. She wanted to get them out of the exploding drug scene in Oak Cliff. But I was in college, discovering that psychology was my calling, had a job and a girlfriend, and I elected to stay. But I was in free fall. I could barely cover rent, gas, and cans of Wolf brand chili. I was a daily pot smoker. Pot was the best part of each day. After I got home from work and when college assignments were done, I set my mind free to roam, unfettered by the sadness and the loneliness and uncertainty that I'd struggled with for years. But pot was expensive. It cost $10 an ounce. Sometimes I found myself counting out spare change to make a buy. Soon after the move to Arizona, my sister returned to Dallas under the pretense of attending El Centro. She hung around with guys dressed in denim, turquoise, and leather who always avoided eye contact. She didn't work, but was never without a roll of cash. I had to ask, what gives? I figured she was selling dope, and it seemed like a solution to my chronic poverty. Okay, it's very simple, she said. You buy a pound from Greg or one of the other guys that goes to Austin every weekend and pick up a load. You take that pound and break it down into lids, 1-ounce bags, and sell them. Depending on how much you keep for yourself, you can make as much as $60 on a $100 pound. What about the cops? I asked. In 1972, you could go to prison for possession of 1 joint. She looked at me like I was an idiot child. You got to be careful, she said. An extra $50, $60, even $100 a month was just too good to walk away from. Plus, I'd never have to buy dope because I'd be the source. But maybe the even bigger hook was how cool it would be to be a drug dealer. There was something of Robin Hood in the figure of the long-haired kid in the fringed leather jacket slinging lids and tabs of acid. A counterculture hero, an outlaw, like Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper in Easy Rider. And from 40-plus years away, I can also see a sad urge to follow my dad's footsteps, to get his approval, even though I never told him I was going outlaw. Not too long after my sister showed up, a bunch of her hippie friends needed a place to crash, and she volunteered my place. I wasn't too happy about that, but counterculture rules meant it wasn't cool to say no. My place was barren, except for a cheap couch and chair my dad had bought me on one of his clandestine visits. The bunch of ragged, boisterous freaks, male and female, gathered on my floor, drinking bottles of Spinata and Bally High and smoking weed like it was a contest. But soon they all passed out as I slept on the couch with that pile of humans on the floor in front of me. But I was awakened a few hours later with a group sex scene underway, and I hoped like hell my sister wasn't amongst them, even though I knew she was. I pretended to sleep, And in the morning, everyone acted like nothing happened. As they packed up, Greg, the guy who went to Austin for weed, said, hey man, I was wondering if you need a roommate to split rent? Well, I hadn't thought about it, but it sure would help, I said. How much, he asked. Split $65, I said. Done deal, and we shook. Greg fronted me a pound of dope and paid his rent out of my earnings on that first pound. I was ecstatic. Rent was halved. My head filled with the new stereo that I'd buy, the cool boots that I'd wear, the bed that I needed. But things went wrong almost right away. One warm night, I pulled in the driveway in my '64 Beetle, and through the open door saw Greg indiscreetly working on a mound of pot. I panicked and burst in, yelling, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" Litting out a pound. What's it look like, he said, handing me a tight, unlit joint. Don't be such a redneck, he said. Along with narc, redneck was perhaps the worst thing one person could call another. It meant pathetically unenlightened, a dud, a nobody. Later that month, my girlfriend and I arrived home late, anticipating the magic of a new bed in the antique frame bought with fresh cash at Canton Trade Days. A record on the turntable was going thunk, thunk. Moans came from the bedroom. I went to the door. Who's there? It's me, man. Sorry, we used your bed. And a lit joint arced across the room. I picked it up and I said, get the hell out. Greg and girl hurriedly dressed and went to the living room, and my girlfriend and I laid down, too exhausted to care about the still warm bed. Just as I started to drift, my bare leg struck something wet, slick. No, not a used... Hot rage hit, and I slammed into the living room screaming, get the fuck out of here now and take that thing you left in my bed and don't you come back. Oddly, he didn't argue. He knew the drill. He gathered his possessions and stash and left. I had a quick flash forward of what my life as a dealer pretended, and I did not like what I saw. Later, my sister asked, why do you have to be such a redneck to Greg? Why do you have to be such a goddamned asshole, I said. I was her brother, but she was on his side. And what the hell was all that going on the floor the other night? What are you doing hanging out with these people anyway? Why don't you just shut your mouth, she said. Then I went all big brother on her. You ever thought about what you're doing with your life? I mean, you know, a little fun can go a long way, but why don't you butt out, and when I want your advice, I'll ask for it, she screamed. Sadly, my relationship, never too steady, pretty much ended right there. She had slipped into my father's business of solving money problems with crime, and I couldn't go with her. We made several more awkward attempts to set things right over time, but they always deteriorated into the same painful argument. Several years later, my dad finally fell into an FBI trap and was imprisoned, only to be murdered at age 70 by a sidekick a little more than 16 months after his parole to San Antonio. The moment I kicked Greg out of my house was the first of a number of such moments to come, when a grace that either eluded my father and sister or which they rejected intervened to save me from myself. In years to come, I made other witless attempts to ruin my life, but they all failed. 40 years and more have passed since I tried to get my ducks in a row by selling pot. Even now I'm stunned at what a dumbass I was, especially with the FBI in the mix. Kind of like pumping gas while smoking a cigarette and still not blowing the car up. What was I thinking? If I could, I'd send this note to the young guy I was all those years ago. All is well, bro. Don't change a thing. Your ducks were in a row from the get-go. Have faith. Have faith.